Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be sharing this beginner-friendly watercolour painting of a lighthouse and a beach. It's a fresh, fairly loose scene, and it's made in a line and wash style, which means that I'll first sketch the scene out lightly in pencil, make sure it's fairly accurate, make sure my lighthouse is symmetrical and in the right place, and then I shall go over my pencil lines with fine liner. I'm using an HB pencil for my sketch and trying not to indent the paper too much so that I can erase it if I need to correct any mistakes. And once I'm happy with my pencil sketch, I'm going over it with waterproof fine liner. I'm using a Faber-Castell Artist Pitt pen, and it's a 0.5mm nib. And this ink line work gives me the line part of my line and wash. The wash, of course, will be provided by the paint. I'm adding some shaded areas, and that gives me some darker values, a nice roadmap to follow for the painting. But first, a quick plug for my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's available to buy from all good bookstores, and I'll leave a couple of links to it below. It contains a lot of useful information for beginners, covering all the basic areas of watercolour painting and 10 unique tutorials for you to follow. So now let's get on with today's demo. I'm using a piece of Saunders Waterford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, and my board's at an angle of about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm going to be painting the sky and the water in first, wet in wet, so using a large wash brush. This is a Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5-inch modeler brush. I'm wetting the sky. I'm wetting the distant mountains, but I'm cutting around the lighthouse and leaving that dry paper so I can preserve the white of the paper for the lighthouse itself. This is now a mixture of cobalt blue with a touch of cerulean blue. I'm sweeping it across the sky. You can see it's softly diffusing into the damp paper as I paint wet in wet. I'm being careful to use the tips of the brush and leaving gaps for these soft white feathery clouds, allowing the paint to run out a bit so it becomes paler nearer to the horizon, and bringing it down over my distant mountains, and then bringing some of that paint across the water into the beach, cutting around the lighthouse again, going over those distant mountains. That's where this shaped brush is very useful for cutting around the lighthouse itself. Now to go on to the dry paper on the beach and to introduce some raw umber, bringing that colour down over the beach using fairly horizontal brush strokes to keep the beach nice and flat. And where it mixes with the blue that I just put down, it softly blends into the wet paint to give me this darker colour, giving me a bit of variety but also just a hint of wet sand at the waterline. Then I can come over my rocks and start to add some colour and some tonal value using raw umber, a touch of blue, possibly a little bit of Payne's grey for some of the darker areas, and maybe touching into some raw sienna as well. Bit of extra darker tone across the beach. I'm just working on this rocky outcrop below the lighthouse. Then just a touch of brighter blue in the water. And now I'll let it dry completely once this is done. And as soon as it's dry, then I can continue and paint in the distant mountains. And for that I'll use a mid-value grey that I'll mix up using cobalt blue, the raw umber that I've used for the beach, with touches of burnt sienna and raw sienna, just mixing that until I get this nice mid-value coolish grey. This will dry back a lot lighter and will give me a nice sense of depth and distance. It will look a little bit flat, but not to worry, because later on I'll be glazing over parts of the mountain to give it some texture and a little bit of variety to build up the shape and the form. I'm using my Escoda Perla size 14 round brush, and again cutting around the lighthouse to preserve the white paper. And I've added some raw umber to my grey colour to warm it up for this slightly closer headland that just peeps out from the right. And you can see how this has come much further forward than the distant mountains because of using this warmer, stronger colour. I'm now going to mix up a darker colour, and using my 3/4 inch flat brush, I'm going to drop the darker colour into the headland below the lighthouse, just really putting it in where I've already shaded with my line work, thus following the roadmap that I created at the beginning of the painting. And of course, adding more contrast around our point of interest, which is the lighthouse, with these nice dark contrasting marks. Once I'm happy with the values that I've built up in the headland and the beach, and that I've checked to make sure the distant mountains are dry, I can work into them with a slightly darker glaze. I'm not going to cover the whole of this area. I'm just going to select areas that will become slightly darker with this glaze over the existing mountain colour, and just add a little bit of texture and suggestion of sort of things going on, maybe some tree growth or some rock strata on the distant mountain. And I think that looks quite effective for that distant mountain. Not too much detail, but just enough variety. And as soon as this is completely dry, I can paint in my lighthouse. The lighthouse looks a little bit crooked at the moment. That's because the paper is a bit buckled, but it will dry flat. This is alizarin crimson mixed with a touch of cobalt blue, so that I get this nice, cool, sort of desaturated red for the top of the lighthouse and the base, leaving it nice and white in the middle. Once I'm happy with that paint application on the lighthouse, then I need to leave that to dry completely. And once it's completely dry, I can pop in a little bit of shadow on the left side of the white area and add extra shadow to the red parts too. Just slowly to build up a little bit of value there that really does add to the illusion of that cylindrical form of the lighthouse. And I think I'm quite happy with that. Now it's time to remove the tape and have a look at it, see how it looks. As soon as we reveal this white border, it helps us to look at the painting with fresh eyes, and we can see if there's anything that needs to be done, any adjustments to be made to tonal values, maybe a little bit of extra detail added. But I think I'm happy with the way this has turned out. It's nice and loose, it's fresh, it's quite sort of summery, and I like the shade of red on the lighthouse, which I think complements all the other colours. And I particularly like how delicate the sky is with those feathery white clouds just suggested through that very simple, loose wet in wet brushwork. Well, I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed the video, then please click on the thumbs up button. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, then please consider doing so. It's free to do, and it really does help with our reach. And many thanks to all our wonderful supporters on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. And of course, I'll be posting an advert-free version of this one over on Patreon for you. Many thanks again. Take care and happy painting. Bye.